So thank you, Remedios, for this presentation that was a bit too much, I think, and I am happy to be here. Sincerely, I accepted to come very easily when we met in Paris a few months ago, but I must say that today is a very special day for me, and I would like to dedicate this talk to my close friend and colleague Jean-Charles Dalphin. Jean-Charles it's difficult for me to say he was a professor of pneumology, head of the pneumology department in our university hospital, and the coordinator of the Pasture study that I will show today. And he passed away last week, and I just left his burial ceremony to come here. I think he would have been very happy with this talk, and especially because most of the audience is composed of farmers and cheesemakers, because in addition to be a professor of pneumology and very well known in the world, especially for his work on the farmer's lung, very severe disease of dairy farmers. He was a farmer himself, and he had a vineyard, he had animals, and he loved this type of life. So really, sincerely, I thank you for being here for him. So my aim today is to show you most of the results, not all the results, because there are more than 60 publications from this study, and so it's difficult to summarize everything in a single talk, but most of the results of this cohort of children, the Pasture study. So where did it come from? From the observation that from the 1960s to the 2000s, even the 1990s, there was an unprecedented increase in allergic atopic diseases. This increase was significantly associated with urbanization and development, and generally speaking, with an increased standard of living. And initially, it was attributed to the pollution of cities, to the life in cities, and soon after, people discovered that, of course, the symptoms were aggravated by the urban life, but the increase in the number of patients was not linked to this urban life per se, but it was, for instance, associated with a decreased family size, a decreased number of infections in early life, bacteria, but also viruses because of vaccination, antibiotics, diminution of parasites, slaughtering and meat control. All this diminished the infectious pressure. And it was why English researcher spoke of the hygiene hypothesis. That is, the increase of allergic diseases was associated with increase in hygiene. But we couldn't neglect major changes in feeding habits. And in this story, it was stressed by a couple of researchers, especially people living in Central Europe, in the Alpine regions of Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, that the farm environment, in fact, was protective environment. And among all this, raw milk and the role of raw milk was really an unexpected protective association. Everybody was surprised doing the studies to see raw milk emerging as a factor of protection. So being born and living on a farm was a major circumstances of protection against allergy from cross-sectional studies, that is comparison between children living on a farm and non-living on a farm at a single moment. And the protection was associated with the time spent with animals in the stable, in the barn, but also and independently with drinking raw milk. So it was published, and the publications showed clearly that it was true for the consumption of raw milk, both by the pregnant mothers and by their child in early life. This association found initially in the Alpine countries was found nearly everywhere in the world. There are very few studies that don't show this association. Even studies that were said to be against this so-called hypothesis, when you see the data, they also show that even urban children, but drinking raw milk, had a protection against allergy. But these results were not easily accepted by the scientific community because raw milk, has this danger area around it, and finding this positive influence of raw milk couldn't be accepted by some people, especially pediatricians. And you can see that, however, the results were quite impressive. You have the incidence of asthma, for instance, for a fever, and for allergenic sensitization in children in rural areas, but not drinking raw milk here. And you can see the half reduction, nearly, the blue bars, for children drinking raw milk only, that is independently on living on a farm in orange, and both associated were synergistic, and you had a better protection by living on a farm plus drinking raw milk. So as I told you, nevertheless, most of our colleagues couldn't believe, so it's why we decided to set up the Pasture cohort, to have a longitudinal study of a number of children, comparing children living on a farm and born on a farm, and children not living on a farm, but in the same rural areas. So there was not the bias of living in a city or living in a rural area. All the children, 1,000 families at the beginning, were living in these rural areas. So the study began in 2002. It was performed by 5 teams, research teams in Finland, Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and France. And we were in charge of the French cohort in the east of France, at the border of Switzerland. The region is Franche-Comté. So the children were followed from the pregnancy of their mother. That is, we began the study in the last trimester of pregnancy, and this year the children are no longer children, but teenagers. They are 16, and next year we will have the medical visit of the 17 years old children. There were thousands of questionnaires on environment, diet, behavior, occupation, health, blood, milk, environmental samples were taken, and a lot are still stored, waiting for better analytical measurements for the future. And the children had medical visits at 1, 3, 4, 6, 10, and next year 17 years. There were microbiological, immunological, genomic studies, a lot of studies on all these samplings. So first, before giving the results, I would like to set something, that the Pasture study didn't specifically address the issue of raw milk cheeses. And why? Because, of course, for us, French, Franche-Comté people, we would have liked to have the raw milk cheese among the questions that were asked to the families. In fact, the studies were based on correlations between environmental, biological data, lab measurements, medical data on questionnaires and medical visits, and data collected by the parents. There were yearly questionnaires. In addition, for the first year of life, there was like a diary book where the parents noted everything the children did and ate, and our colleagues outside France thought that the differentiation between the origin of the milk to prepare cheeses was judged non-reliable, and we couldn't have this parameter in our study. So there were questions on farm-made cheese, but this question on farm-made cheese doesn't cover all raw milk cheeses, especially it doesn't cover our raw milk cheeses in our region because they are prepared in separate cheese making small factories, but it's not made on the farm. So it's why most of the results are on raw milk, and if we speak of cheese, we cannot differentiate the raw milk cheeses from the other cheeses. So I wanted to just say that first so that you cannot expect wonderful results on raw milk cheeses. So 7 years later, what are the messages of Pasture? So the results of the Pasture cohort totally confirm the initial results that were from cross-sectional studies and that our colleagues and other people didn't want to believe. That is the contact with animals, the stable and the barn environment, and also, and last but not least, drinking raw milk is protective against allergic diseases. Of course, it's not allergy to milk, it's allergies in general, that is asthma, atopic dermatitis, hay fever, all types of allergic diseases related to special antibodies that give special reactions of allergy. So, drinking raw milk independently protects against the occurrence of these allergic diseases later in life. In addition, and this was not the first aim of our study because the aim was on allergic diseases, not on infections, but taking our results because, of course, we had questions on the health of children given by the parents, but also doctor diagnosis. We could show that drinking raw milk also protected against acute infections of the first year of life. And that is, I think, a very interesting result because these infections especially respiratory infections of the first year of life, may be very, very severe in such babies, and there are a number of deaths occurring because of these infections. And it's why I think the protection is quite important. You can see in these graphs that the raw milk, drinking raw milk, protects against rhinitis, respiratory infection of the lung, otitis also, and you may see that from so here is ultra high temperature milk, UHT milk, here pasteurized milk, boiled farm milk, and the real raw milk, and you have increasing protection from the shop milk, usual shop milk, to the raw milk here, for instance, for rhinitis. So after giving these general results, I would like to focus on a few points. The first point that really is a key point from all the study is that the diversity matters. Diversity matters in the farm environment, the diversity of exposures, the best protected children were those children where the mother during pregnancy and themselves in the first, second year of age spend time in the stable but also in the barn and in their house with the same environment finally as in the working areas. A diversity of microbes were found to be important, also pollen from the hay and plant particles from the straw. And we couldn't show a direct correlation between the quantity of microbes in the environment, but it was clearly an influence of the diversity of this environment, and that is really a point. Diversity also of animals. We could show that the mothers that were most exposed to different types of farm animals, goats plus cows plus sheep plus cat plus dogs, were the most protective mothers, and the children exposed to all these animals were also most protected. The diversity of microorganisms could be confirmed in these farms, of course, gram-positive and negative bacteria, actinomycetes, and a lot of fungi, especially Absidia, Orosium, Cladosporium, Penicillium. And of course, the highest diversity was in the most traditional farms, and these most traditional farms were the most protective farms also. So all this is in several publications. I will not cite every publication for every result. So in addition to the diversity of microbes in the environment, we could also show the importance of the diversity of the food in the first year of life, that is the food diversification is important, and pediatricians and allergologists until recently recommended to have a late diversification to avoid allergy, and we clearly showed the reverse situation, that is the diversification should be rather early, and food, different types of food should be added rather fast after birth or after. So we, however, had a dedicated study to cheeses. As I told you, we couldn't separate between raw milk and non-raw milk cheeses, but we tried to have, because we had very, very precise information on that, and we had several categories according to the technical type of cheese, hard pressed cheese and everything you know better than me. And we could show that those children who ate early, that is before the 18th month of life, the highest diversity of cheeses were the most protected against atopic dermatitis at the age of 6, and also food allergy. In fact, there was also a quantitative aspect of our results, because children who never or very rarely ate cheese had a higher risk of food allergy and allergic rhinitis. So there is a quantitative aspect, but especially a diversity aspect. So I think that is quite important. And for those people who are interested in additional results we could get from our multiple questionnaires, the Finnish children had the highest frequency of cheese consumption. The French children had the most diverse consumption of cheeses, which is good for us. And farmers and non-farmers children had similar cheese consumption. We could have expected something different, but it was not true. And cheese consumption diversity was correlated with the mother level of education. That is the highest the education of the mother is, and the most diverse cheeses are eaten by their children. The second point, of course, is focused on raw milk. Raw milk, the protective factor. So it was a factor most constantly found in all analyses, and there were so many analyses we did. It was a protective factor that was independent of all other farm-associated factors. There were an additional effect of farm milk butter, farm milk yogurt, farm milk cheese, in addition to the specific role of drinking raw milk. The mother's consumption that was found already in the cross-sectional studies was clearly shown in the Pasture study. So this mother's consumption of raw milk is also protective for her child. And the consumption in early life, that is before 6 years of age, is the most important window of opportunity for drinking raw milk. So, of course, all this is totally paradoxical because we are recommended not to give raw milk to pregnant mothers and children under 5 years of age, in France at least. And so we are in a totally paradoxical situation. So our first hypothesis at the very beginning when we began the study was that the microflora, the microbiota of the milk was the important thing in this protective effect. And we first focused, because it was a result of a cross-sectional study I showed you with bars, it was endotoxin, bacterial endotoxins. So one of the first measurements we did on the milks that were collected from the farm and from the fridge of all families was to look for endotoxins. And our first surprise was to find that the milk, the farm milk that was in the tank of the people or collected after milking was poorer in bacterial endotoxins than the shop milk that was kept in the fridge of the families. And so it was the first question mark, but it shows well how farmers in Europe that use their raw milk to do something are very cautious with the contamination, the infection of their milk. But we had to abandon the hypothesis of endotoxins, and I would like to say that it doesn't appear that the quantity of microbes in the milk is the factor that is responsible for the protective effect. Clearly, once again, the diversity of the microflora looks important, but not at the level we would have expected. There was no association between the numbers of organisms or single species and clinical parameters, and the association was mostly with the diversity, and it's just a picture that shows from the Pasture study the composition of the microflora of the milks. You have the UHT milk on the left, and the raw milk is the red bar on the right. And of course, it's easy to see the big difference, but we know that, you know that, and it was not so new, but there was no correlation with the protection. The raw milk is a protective factor. So what is protective if the microorganisms are not the main protection? So we looked for non-microbial components, and we have some evidence of changes in the whey proteins that could be involved. Also immunity components. All this was shown by Tonbars before. And the lipids look like to be very important factors, and especially the role of omega-3 could be shown, and more recently the concentration of butyrate and propionate in the feces of the children were associated with protection and associated with their consumption of dairy products. So the third and last point I want to stress is early exposure is associated with immunological changes. We had a lot of immunological measurements that showed first the influence of the mother's exposure that drive the immune response, the innate immunity and the adaptive immunity are both influenced by the environment and drinking milk of the mother, and there are cytokines that are produced in the cord blood, that is before the child is exposed to any environment. The mother already influence his immunity. The early consumption of milk, of raw milk by the child, has also an influence on the development of innate and adaptive immunity. So if you want to put raw milk in this big picture of factors that predispose to allergy on the top and factors that protect against allergy, you have all the farming activities and the consumption of raw milk that appears here. It's one among the different factors at stake. The possible mechanism deal with the microbiota, and I will not elaborate on this because you had a wonderful talk just before, and we could also make the link with the maternal milk and the exposure to raw milk of the mother. And so I would like to just conclude. The Pasture study confirmed the protective effect of raw milk consumed by the mother during pregnancy and by the children in the first 6 years of age. protection against allergic disorders, but also against acute infections of the first year of life. The effect is increased by a child's consumption of farm dairy products. We demonstrated an association with immunological parameters and suggested interference with genetic factors that I will not elaborate on, and intestinal and respiratory microbiota. And I want to thank, of course, all my colleagues, and especially Jean-Charles, because he was so important in our work, and Erika von Mussius, who is a big coordinator of the study, and she's a wonderful person and a big scientist. Thank you very much.